If you're a fan of podcasts, chances are you've thought about starting your own. But once you've recorded your show, what are the next steps? How do you reach listeners and build an audience? Well, Audioboom can help with our $9.99 monthly subscription plan for hosting and distribution. With Audioboom's $9.99 subscription plan, you get 200 minutes of recording time for each episode, a branded homepage on the Audioboom platform, embeddable players for web and social media, unlimited storage, and episode scheduling. Plus, thanks to Audioboom's partnerships with the leading distribution and streaming platforms, your show may be eligible for placement on Apple Podcasts, Deezer, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Savin, Spotify, and Stitcher, pending approval by each platform. And with Audioboom's advanced analytics, you'll be able to see how often your show has been downloaded, what devices your audience use to listen to your show, the age, gender, and location of your listeners, and so much more. To sign up for your $9.99 monthly subscription plan, go to audioboom.com/start and sign up today. That's AUDIOBOOM.com/START. Sign up now and get the support you need to start your podcast today. That's audioboom.com/start.
Welcome to the fourth episode of True Gambling Stories. I'm the writer and host, Sean Schaefer. I want to give a big thank you to all our listeners out there who have supported the show, and please tell a few friends about us. If you missed one of our first episodes, please go back and check it out. If you really like us, maybe give us a 5-star review and a nice comment. At True Gambling Stories, we take a look each month at a unique tale of gambling and poker lore. From the dice tables to an underground poker room to the sports book to the horse track. In our stories, you can bet there will be some dice, cards, casinos, and plenty of betting. Those stories also occasionally include a gun. This month, we feature an attempted assassination. Like many of you, I'll be checking out the Kentucky Derby on May 5th, and maybe dropping a few dollars just to make it interesting. With horse racing taking center stage, this month's story takes us back almost 90 years to an amazing horse and someone's attempt to end its career, or at least make a few bucks off his success. It's horse racing, history, intrigue, and a mysterious death, all in one show for your audio experience. So grab a mint julep, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Phar Lap. Huge wins, mysteries, and assassins. The track and big hats are ready. Plenty of drinks have been served. The jockeys are dressed in silks of every color. The crowd belts out my old Kentucky home before the horses are loaded into the starting gates. This will be the scene on May 5th as about 23-year-old horses take off, racing the 1.25 miles in the annual Run for the Roses. This year's Kentucky Derby will once again attract millions of viewers and bettors, watching for the next horse to claim the spotlight in hopes for a shot at the Triple Crown. The sport may not be what it was at the turn of the 18th century, but horse racing is still a $25 billion industry in the U.S. alone. Millions of Americans will be lining up at the nearest betting window to get a few dollars down on the Derby, and then the Preakness, and then the Belmont Stakes. Horse racing as a sport and gambling enterprise is found all over the world, from England to Argentina to Russia to Thailand and every place in between. The simple fact is people just love to bet on horses. It can be a cheap day out with friends and family, some low-stakes fun with an excuse to drink a few beers. As the Derby approached, Justify was an early 5-2 favorite, and Bob Baffert was hoping for his 5th win in the race. Justify was impressive at the Santa Anita Derby on April 7th. In his first stakes race, he won by 3 lengths. There are a few interesting footnotes about the horse. Justify is looking to become the first horse since 1882 that didn't win a race as a 2-year-old. He's also looking to become the first Derby winner since Big Brown in 2008 to win with just 3 career races. Justify's jockey Mike Smith said this to the Louisville Courier-Journal after the Santa Anita. What you're seeing right now is really just raw talent. He's got so much room to grow and to get even better. If he moves forward off this race, which he should, then it's even kind of scary to talk about. Bob Baffert and the horse's owners hope that raw talent carries the day on May 5th, with more than $1.2 million going to the winner. Times were tough in Australia the second half of the 1920s. The stock market crash of 1929 only made the problems worse. The Australian economy ground to a halt as commodity prices fell, and by 1932 about one-third of the population was unemployed. The Great Depression brought grief and misery for many Australians, worried about how to put food on the table. It would take a decade for the country to fully recover. Sometimes people just need a distraction from their regular lives. Something to get their minds off finding a job or trying to make a mortgage payment or even trying to just feed their children. For many Australians, the racehorse Phar Lap filled the bill. A 17-hand chestnut gelding, the horse had amazing speed and a giant stride. The name Phar Lap comes from a southern Chinese and Thai word meaning lightning, which was certainly very fitting. Phar Lap was born in New Zealand in 1926. Sydney trainer Harry Telford persuaded American businessman David J. Davis to buy the colt at auction. Davis made much of his money importing household wares down under. He raced horses in Australia as a hobby. Telford spent his entire life around horses and was a student of pedigrees and bloodlines. He studied over charts looking for a future champion. He thought he had found one in Phar Lap, which was sired by a horse named Nightwatch to the mare Entreaty. Telford's brother Hugh lived in New Zealand at the time and would do the bidding for the horse at the 1928 Trentham yearly auction. He was told he could bid up to 190 guineas. A guinea was an English gold coin and worth between 20 and 30 shillings. Phar Lap ended up only costing 160 guineas, about 130 bucks, and Telford thought he'd found a bargain. When the horse arrived in Sydney, however, his thoughts changed. Most at the time described the horse as gangly and awkward, and his face was covered with warts. After seeing the colt, Davis was incensed and felt his money had been wasted. He refused to pay Telford to train the horse. Telford, who was now in his 50s, knew a lot about horses, but still had not trained a real champion. Nearly broke and with few owners left willing to pay for his training services, Telford agreed to train the horse for nothing. In return, he was promised a 2/3 share of any of Phar Lap's winnings. That deal would certainly pay off in the coming years. Ed Bowen is a thoroughbred horse racing historian and president of the Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation. The institution funds equine research. Ed's written 20 books after growing up in Florida around horse racing. He's the go-to guy when it comes to the history of the sport.
As far as the origin of horse racing, it is widely believed, and with some documentation, that as soon as the horse was domesticated, and I'm thinking that's about 6,000 years ago, it became a natural offshoot of being an agricultural person. The Romans had chariot racing and this, that, and the other. As far as getting close to the racing that we know it today, in the 1600s in England, there began to be a kind of formalization. King Charles II was known to not only like racing, but he actually rode races.
Breeding began in earnest to mold champion horses. It became a kind of international diplomacy. Breeds in Asia were offered as gifts to royalty and other heads of state, which in turn furthered interest in horses in other parts of the world. Horse racing is known as the sport of kings for a reason. Soon the royalty and nobility were racing their horses, and a sport and industry was born. Arabian breeds were given high regard in the new horse commerce. Aleppo, Syria was actually a hub for horse trade and breeding. Eventually, the combination of Arabian horses and a few other breeds with Irish and English mares began producing faster and faster horses. As racing among the kings and nobility flourished, a more formal system was needed.
Because of the aristocracy of England, they began to like this sport, and they felt they needed to create rules. And for over 50 years or 100 years or so, by the middle of the 1700s, the Jockey Club was created, and it was the body that conducted racing. And by calling it the Jockey Club, they consigned us all to centuries of confusion, because in those days, the word jockey referred to someone intimately involved in the horse, not somebody who wears a small person who wears a bright shirt and rides them in races. So we've lived with that use of the word Jockey Club over many years. It's used for some racetracks call themselves, like the Maryland Jockey Club is the owner of Pimlico and Laurel and that sort of thing. But anyway, that's more detail than you need. But there grew up a kind of a tradition among it was a great interest among the aristocracy. And when the colonists came over, even though they eventually broke from the motherland, there was a great impetus to imitate what they had left behind, and so racing took place in the colonies, to some extent imitating what they had known before. But there was also an era when, just through the practicality of life, the races were very short dashes through city streets, as opposed to these lengthy events out in the country. Eventually, in the colonies, that type of racing prevailed, and so it was a fairly short time that American colony racing was dashes through the middle of the street.
So imagine you've got these rich guys who regularly get together and race their horses through the countryside. It must have been quite the spectacle. Maybe you're a blacksmith at the time, or a farmer on a small plot of land. It's been a long week of work, and what do you want to do that weekend for a little relaxation? The same thing many people do today. They wager a few bucks or pounds or whatever on a horse race. Of course, there were no betting windows yet, but Nigel the blacksmith might bet Simon the farmer a shilling or two on the race between two local lords. It may have been the sport of kings, but the peasants were getting in on the action.
Well, that was amazing how much that came into play, even at a time that you have the thought that there wasn't a lot of casual money around. And race meetings like in Charleston or Annapolis and the Carolinas, they became this great annual events that would bring people to see them, and it was a lot of elegance involved. And back in England, some of the first important races were centered around, like, the county fair. It was a way of promoting the commerce of the fair. Gosh, we've got all of our merchants bringing all their goods, and now we're going to have horse racing to help attract people. So there was a sporting element, but also a commercial element.
From there, the horse races evolved over time to the grand spectacles and wagering fun we see today. In the United States, horse racing was among the most popular sports by the late 18th and early 19th centuries.
Horse racing was the primary sport, and part of that had to do with the fact that it was before the automobile, and before the automobile became popular. And even though the train lines had been created, it didn't dominate someone's life. Everyone had a horse. Everyone needed a horse, and so it was a natural outcropping of life, just day-to-day life.
Phar Lap was officially registered as a racehorse in December of 1928. The horse had been gelded so it could focus more on racing than breeding. 3 months after registration, the horse was lined up in the gates for his first race, the Nursery Handicap at Rose Hill Gardens Racetrack in western Sydney. You might think this is one of those defy the odds, a horse that comes out of nowhere and just destroys the competition stories. It's not. Phar Lap finished last in that first race and didn't place in his next 3. That changed, though, on April 27, 1929 at Rose Hill when he got his first win, with 17-year-old apprentice jockey Jack Baker aboard. The race was a maiden juvenile handicap. A maiden race is one in which none of the horses had won a race yet. So Phar Lap had shown some early promise and was then rested for a few months before being entered in a series of 5 more races, all in a tougher class. That September, the horse advanced from a gangly underdog to a proven winner that was grabbing headlines. On September 14, 1929, he finished second in the Chelmsford Stakes at Randwick Racehorse in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. The finish gained Phar Lap some respect from Australia's racing community. A week later, Phar Lap won the Rose Hill Guineas. The race was begun in 1910 and featured many Australian champions. The race was a precursor to the biggest race for the country's 3-year-olds, the AJC Derby. Phar Lap was on a roll heading into the Derby. The press took note of the horse's unexpected success. When the horse won by 3.5 lengths, Phar Lap became the talk of the Australian racing world. In the spring of 1929, Harry Telford hired 23-year-old Tommy Woodcock to become the horse's new strapper. A strapper is an Aussie term for a handler. It's the person who works with the horse and loads it in and out of the track for races and training sessions. Woodcock became the most important human in Phar Lap's life, constantly on call and occasionally even sleeping outside the horse's stable. The young strapper had originally been an apprentice jockey but had grown too tall. Woodcock's job was definitely not always glamorous. Cleaning out stables at 4 in the morning was the norm, but his gentle and understanding nature made him a natural with horses. He spent every waking hour looking after Phar Lap. Throughout the late 20s and early 1930s, Phar Lap just couldn't be stopped. Australians latched onto the horse, cheering on his every stride around the track. Jim Pike became his regular jockey. Pike was a skilled rider, popular with bettors. The Museum Victoria notes this about Pike and Phar Lap's natural instincts. When aboard the Champion, Pike seldom had to do any more than flick his whip in Phar Lap's general direction. The horse notched win after win, 14 straight at one point, breaking multiple track records along the way. To the Australian public, Phar Lap had become much more than just another racehorse. Australian author Geoff Armstrong wrote the book on Phar Lap. Well, he really wrote 2 books about Phar Lap, one on his life as a whole and one solely about his win at the Melbourne Cup. He lives in Sydney, has been in sports publishing for 30 years, and always wanted to write the biography of Phar Lap since his grandfather told him about the horse as a young boy. He expounds on what made Phar Lap such a great winner and how he resonated with Aussies.
The reason Phar Lap is so revered today, I think, goes back to the times that he raced. I think he's a truly great racehorse, but there have been a number of truly great racehorses in Australia going back to Bowen in the 1890s, and then even today we have a magnificent mare, Winks, running around at the moment, who is just amazing. But Phar Lap came at just the right time, if you like. It was the late 20s, early 30s. The Depression had just hit. At the same time, the wireless had been invented, and so people could hear about stories. They could hear Phar Lap's races. There was also the newsreels were in the picture theatres. So Phar Lap, as well as being a phenomenal racehorse, became something of a media star. And the other thing about Phar Lap that sets him apart is that he is that classic story of his trainer was broke, his jockey was he was a great jockey, Jim Pike, but he had gambling problems and he never had a lot of money. His famous strapper, Tommy Woodcock, was a battler from the north coast of New South Wales. And it just became this wonderful story. And the other thing about Phar Lap was that he didn't just win. He made hacks of his rivals. That was the expression that was used in Australia at the time. He made hacks of his rivals. And there were some great racehorses that he made hacks of, horses like Night March and Chatham and Amonis. And what he did in a time of great uncertainty during the Depression, when a lot of people in Australia didn't know where the next dollar was coming from, or in those days the next pound was coming from. Phar Lap gave them certainty. He won every time, and he won in great style. And he also he wasn't a pampered champion. He didn't just race in, the weight for age races. He ran in the big handicaps, and in Australia, the biggest handicap of all was the Melbourne Cup.
The Australian equivalent of the Kentucky Derby is the Melbourne Cup. It's the most prestigious race down under, and the two races have quite a few similarities. Both have a deep history. The Cup was founded in 1861 and the Derby in 1875. The Derby is run for 3-year-olds. The Cup is for 3-year-olds and over, but is usually won by a 4 or 5-year-old, and horses can compete multiple times. Both feature some of their country's top jockeys and best thoroughbreds. The Derby is 1 1/4 mile, but Cup horses run just under 2 miles. Both races have slogans that show the passion and thrill of following those horses and jockeys. The Derby is called the most exciting 2 minutes in sports. The Melbourne Cup is referred to as the race that stops a nation. Both races are the highlight of each country's racing season, and millions tune in for the action. The 2018 Derby will pay out $2 million to the winner. In the 2017 Melbourne Cup, the British-bred horse Rekindling took home $2.76 million. Geoff Armstrong offers some insight on the popularity of horse racing down under and what the Melbourne Cup means to the country, including betting.
Horse racing today is not as big as it once was, but back in the 1930s, I'd say from the 1860s through probably for the next century, it was the biggest sport in Australia, and a lot of that goes back to gambling. Australians like to bet, and the Melbourne Cup became our biggest race. I found this fantastic story in a Brisbane newspaper, and Brisbane's a long way from Melbourne, in 1861 after the running of the first Melbourne Cup, and it already described the Melbourne Cup as essentially the race that stops the nation. It struck a chord with Australians from day one. Uniquely, as far as a country's biggest race, it's a handicap, and the reason that appeals to Australians is that it gives all the horses a chance, which means you can get stories of poor battling people winning the Melbourne Cup. You also get huge stories of betting plunges year after year. Some of the most amazing betting plunges in Australian racing history have occurred around the Melbourne Cup, and it's just a race. It's quite phenomenal I'll give you a good example close to home. My wife doesn't follow horse racing at all, couldn't care less, except for Melbourne Cup Day. And that's true of families in Australia across the country. And it's been true in Australia since pretty much the running of the first race. And some of the great winners of the Melbourne Cup, horses like Bowen and Phar Lap, they become, and Mackay Deepen more recently, they become genuine heroes in Australia. It's quite an extraordinary thing.
In 1930, Phar Lap took his spot in the starting gate. But just getting there was quite a story. In the days preceding the 1930 Melbourne Cup at Flemington Racecourse, the whispers and phone calls had Tommy Woodcock and trainer Harry Telford nervous. There had been threats to poison and shoot their prize-winning horse before he took to the track. Phar Lap was a huge betting favorite, and the lead story in all the newspapers that week. But just getting the horse to the starting gate for the 2-mile race seemed like a major challenge. On Saturday, November 1st, Woodcock was on his horse at 5:45 a.m., 3 days before the Cup. Phar Lap was returning from a practice session at Caulfield Racecourse, where the horse was being stabled. The strapper led Phar Lap down the street just outside the track. A car slowly approached near the two horses, and a shotgun was pointed out the window. A shot then rang out, and the horse dragged Woodcock from his own horse. It's easy to imagine the chaos. A gunman had just attempted to kill the country's national horse racing hero. The car quickly sped away. Woodcock managed to get Phar Lap to safety and determined that the horse was unharmed. Newspapers flashed the attempted killing across the front pages, and the eager public gobbled them up. Conspiracy theories ran wild. Was it the work of a rival horse owner? where bookies worried they may lose money and tried to take out the horse to avoid bad business. It's really a crazy notion, this idea of assassinating a racehorse. Imagine if one of America's great Triple Crown winners, like War Admiral or Secretariat or Seattle Slew, had been shot before one of those races. It would have been huge news. Robert Philpotts was a young boy at the time and an eyewitness to the shooting. He spoke with the Museum Victoria in 2001 about what he saw that day as he rode his new bike through the area.
I was born and bred in Glenhuntly, and for my 14th birthday, which was in October 1930, I was given a bike from my cousin who had grown out of it. He'd grown older, and it was brought up to me on the Friday night, and naturally I got up early on the Saturday morning to have a ride all around the streets, because you could ride around streets in those days because of very, very, very few cars. Anyway, I was riding up James Street, coming near the corner of Etna Street, when I saw Phar Lap and Tommy Woodcock coming down from the racecourse down from Manchester Grove. And at that time, there was a big black sedan car turned from James Street into Etna Street. The next thing was bang, and this bloke in the back seat shot out a shotgun from well, there was only the one blast from memory, and of course Tommy Woodcock, all the trainers in those days always rode little ponies and led their horses, and of course he took the horse and up onto the footpath. And then I, of course, got the wind up and went for my life, and I went down to the Ormond footy ground and stayed down there for half an hour or so till I got hungry for my breakfast and came home, and of course didn't say a word about it. I didn't want to tell anybody what I'd seen. As I say, it was probably 30 years later before I ever told anyone. I was out with a friend, and we were having a walk around, and I said, "Oh, that's where Phar Lap was shot." I said, "There'd be pellets in those pickets there." She said, "Oh, how would you know that?" I said, "Well, I was there, and that was the first time I never even mentioned it to my family or my brother or anybody. I don't think my brother even knows now I was there. I've never told him."
Geoff Armstrong says reports at the time show that pellets were never found and that there were no signs of a real shot. Whether a well-planned hoax or not, there was a gun and it was fired. Were there blanks in the gun? Was it a scheme to simply sell newspapers? No one knows for sure, but Armstrong is pretty certain the assassination was more show than shot.
The story of Phar Lap's Melbourne Cup in 1930 and the story of the shooting, and I put shooting in inverted commas before the Cup, it's the big... Phar Lap, there's a few mysteries about Phar Lap's life and times, and most famously with his death. But I think the biggest mystery of all concerns the shooting of Phar Lap before the Melbourne Cup in 1930. It actually occurred on Derby Day, which is the Saturday before the Melbourne Cup. Phar Lap had trained that morning, and he came back. It was being taken back to his store by his strapper, Tommy Woodcock, when a car was parked and a shotgun was pointed out from the car. It went bang. Woodcock bravely put himself between the shooter and Phar Lap. He was riding a pony, and then the car screamed away. And it looks for all the world as if someone tried to assassinate the Melbourne Cup favourite. Peter Thompson and I, who wrote our biography of Phar Lap in 2000, we actually wrote a book about this incident in 2005, which we republished in 2010, because we were fascinated by a number of aspects of it, not least the fact that the media was on the scene within minutes. It was amazing how fast the reporters from the Melbourne Herald got to the scene. And the other thing that was fascinating was that in all the early press reports, there was absolutely no mention of pellets being anywhere. There was no signs that actually a shot had been fired, which leads to the conclusion, the obvious conclusion, that there were blanks in the gun, which then could mean that the people who were shooting, and again I put shooting in inverted commas, were shooting at Phar Lap, were just trying to scare the horse. But if that's the case, it's a pretty hopeless assassination attempt. And so many aspects of it just didn't make sense until we found a report in a British magazine about 2 years later, which suggested that the whole thing was just a media hoax, that it was put up by newspapers who were trying to make a front page story out of the whole Phar Lap story running into the Melbourne Cup. And I'm not going to say that is definitely what happened, but I believe that is the most logical explanation as to what happened. That in actual fact, it was the journalists from a newspaper who tried to set up a story which they could then put on the front page, which they did put on the front page extraordinarily quickly. And that led to this great story, which has never been disproven. I'm not suggesting there were eyewitnesses to the shooting. It definitely happened. But what is a mystery is who the shooter was, because no one was ever charged, and what was the motive for it. Because there have been suggestions that if Phar Lap won the Melbourne Cup, the bookmakers would go broke, but our research suggests that's not true. In fact, we found that over the next 12 months, only one Victorian bookmaker was quit on account of being broke. We also made some research on the amount of money that would have been won by punters if Phar Lap won. And because Phar Lap had been a short price favourite since day one, it wasn't as much as had been lost in previous years. So it's just a really weird and really wonderful story. And what happened then, Phar Lap then ran on Derby Day in the Melbourne Stakes, won easily. His trainer, Harry Telford, then shifted the horse in mysterious circumstances out to a training facility at Geelong, which is, I think it's about 100 kilometres west of Melbourne. He brought the horse back on Melbourne Cup Day, and the horse won the Melbourne Cup in famous fashion. And then, quite strangely, the police then just called off their investigation into the shooting as though it was a minor matter, when in actual fact, if it had been a fair dinkum shooting, it was essentially, they were trying to murder Tommy Woodcock, and they were trying to murder the Melbourne Cup favourite. And that's the sort of thing that should have been a huge police investigation. But our suspicions are that the police spoke to the media, found out what was actually going on, and just quietly called the whole thing off. And the story has stewed for, what is it now? We're up to getting close to 90 years. It's quite amazing how it keeps going.
Even if it wasn't a legitimate assassination attempt, it's just so amazing that they would stage something like this. It just kind of speaks to how big of an event Phar Lap at the Melbourne Cup was, I would say.
It shows what an extraordinary story Phar Lap had become.
The shooting may still be a bit of a mystery, but the 1930 Melbourne Cup result was not. Held the first Tuesday of November, the race posed little challenge on the track for Phar Lap. Trainer Harry Telford knew it, but took no chances after the attempted murder. Telford said this to the media that Monday: Phar Lap will win the Melbourne Cup without effort. Some people who know that he is a good thing for the race have become desperate in their attempt to prevent him from getting to the post. The public can be assured that I will take no risk of anyone doing damage between now and the time that he steps on the course at Flemington. The Melbourne Cup is a handicap, and other older, better horses must add weight to make it more of a challenge. That added weight wasn't much of a burden for Phar Lap, as Geoff Armstrong notes.
He was given 9 stone 10, which was a huge weight, but he won easily. It's a famous win, which was then shown on the newsreels, made the front pages of the paper. There was a whole lot of drama surrounding the race, and he became a national hero in the way that no other racehorse before or since has become.
Jim Pike rode the horse to victory, easily running away from the pack down the backstretch, ensuring a win in the country's biggest race. The shooting would not be the only mystery surrounding Phar Lap, however. One more remained. In 1932, David Davis shipped Phar Lap to the U.S. to race in the Agua Caliente Handicap in Tijuana, Mexico. At the time, it was the richest race in North America. It was quite a long haul from Australia to New Zealand and then on to California before heading south of the border. The trip didn't seem to faze the horse, however. Grainy footage of the race from March 21st, 1932 shows fans packed in the stands in their coats and hats, and women in dresses, all hoping to cash a ticket on the Aussie racing champion. When the race begins, Phar Lap breaks from an extreme outside post position and is cut off, falling behind badly to the rear of the field and out wide. He continues to move up, however, after the first turn. By the half-mile pole, Phar Lap is among the leaders and on the move. He sprints past the competition and is never really threatened around the final turn and into the home stretch. Many believe it was the horse's greatest race, and Geoff Armstrong notes its importance in the horse's legacy.
He won that, and if anyone gets a chance to go on YouTube and watch the video of Phar Lap winning the Agua Caliente handicap, it is the most amazing performance I have ever seen by a racehorse. He's about 8 wide the whole trip. He takes off around the back straight and takes careers to the lead, a good 4 furlongs from home, and just wins running away in the end. And this is a horse that had been shipped from Australia by New Zealand to San Francisco and then driven down to Mexico to run at Agua Caliente. It's quite an amazing performance, and people have tended to denigrate the field that he ran against at Agua Caliente, but it wasn't a bad field. There was a Preakness Stakes winner in the race. There was an American Derby winner in the race. He made them look like hacks.
After the race, Phar Lap was stabled in Menlo Park, California, just south of San Francisco. On the afternoon of April 5th, the horse was found dead after battling a brief illness. An autopsy ruled that Phar Lap died of enteritis, an inflammation of the intestine. But controversy persisted, and others later said colic was the culprit. Newspapers ran with stories that the wonder horse had been poisoned. Only days after running what many consider his most amazing race, Phar Lap was dead, and the public seemed not ready to accept a natural cause. In 2000, author Geoff Armstrong and his co-author Peter Thompson believed they found the definitive cause of the great horse's death.
Phar Lap's death occurred, the Agua Caliente was on March 20. He died on April 6, and he died in very, very mysterious circumstances, which no one's ever really been able to solve until what we did in 2000. We showed the evidence, the post-mortem result, to some elite veterinary surgeons in Australia, and they had a look at it and very, very quickly said that Phar Lap had died of a bacterial infection that goes by the name of duodenitis proximal gurginitis. But it's a bacterial infection. It shuts down the large intestine, and basically it has the same impact as a huge colic attack. But the thing was, because he was attacked by a disease that no one had heard of in the 1930s, the disease duodenitis proximal gurginitis wasn't discovered until 1982. So they didn't know what they were treating, and so they had no hope of saving Phar Lap, which is the reason that Phar Lap died in such mysterious circumstances. It's also the reason why, in all the years since, that people have been able to run all these different stories about that Phar Lap was killed by people who hated horse racing, he was killed by gangsters, he was poisoned by arsenic. In my view, none of these stories are true. The evidence just doesn't hold up.
Phar Lap's story remains a legend in Australia. The horse ended its career with an astonishing record of 37 wins and only 51 starts. That also includes 2 second-place and 3 third-place finishes. An Australian movie was even made about the horse in 1983 and received nice reviews. So many decades later, the story of Phar Lap is so unique. A horse that meant so much to so many. His story has been passed down again and again. A horse that lived only 5.5 years made so much of an impact down under. As for the attempted assassination in 1930, police eventually dropped the case, and no one ever confessed to being part of the crime.
And then, quite strangely, the police then just called off their investigation into the shooting as though it was a minor matter, when in actual fact, if it had been a fair dinkum shooting, it was essentially, they were trying to murder Tommy Woodcock, and they were trying to murder the Melbourne Cup favourite, and that's the sort of thing that should have been a huge police investigation. But our suspicions are that the police spoke to the media, found out what was actually going on, and just quietly called the whole thing off. And the story has stewed for, what is it now? We're up to getting close to 90 years. It's quite amazing how it keeps going.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this month's show. This one really meant a lot to me. It was pretty cool because it kind of brought back a lot of memories. When I was growing up, my parents would take my brother and my sister and me to New Mexico for vacation. We'd always hit the horse track a couple times. It was so much fun. And I'm sure a bunch of you guys out there had similar memories. So just a fun episode for me. And as always, if you liked the episode, please let others know. We could always use your help. Share us on social media, and we could always use some 5-star reviews or some nice comments on iTunes or wherever you access the podcast. An easy link to the show is truegamblingstories.com. We want to give a big thanks to our guest Ed Bowen with Grayson-Jockey Club Research Foundation. Ed and the foundation are doing some great work. Please check them out. Also, a big thanks to Museum Victoria, which has archived so much about the Phar Lap story. Lastly, a huge thanks to author Geoff Armstrong. He's such a great storyteller and added so much to this month's show. For some great work on the subject, check out his book simply titled Phar Lap and Melbourne Cup 1930. He also publishes sports-themed books at stokehillpress.com. To follow him on Twitter, check out @GArmstrong61. The World Series of Poker kicks off May 29th, and to coincide, our next story will be a poker tale from the Old West. I will also be in Las Vegas covering the events, so check out my work and follow all the action at pokernews.com. True Gambling Stories is written and hosted by me, Sean Chafin, and edited by the awesome Robert Moreno. Please visit us on Facebook via @TrueGamblingStories, and on Twitter we are @GamblingPod. You can follow me on Twitter @PokerTraditions, and if you like these kinds of stories, please check out my book Raising the Stakes on Amazon.com. You can also check out more of my work at SeanChafin.com. If you have an idea for a story we should feature, please let us know. Look for our next podcast in late May. And lastly, for all your poker and gambling news, information, videos, podcasts, and my feature writing and reporting, please visit pokernews.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Herring, and we hope you're enjoying the show. Just a friendly reminder that this isn't the only show on the Poker News Podcast Network. In fact, we've got a whole bunch of them. For starters, there's me and Brent Harrington.
Hey guys, coming to you each week on the Poker News Podcast. We've also got...
Hey everyone, it's Bruce Briggs.
And Robbie Straczynski, and we're proud to host the Top Pair Home Game Poker Podcast.
Come give us a listen every other week and get your home game poker juices flowing.
Hey all, it's Chad Holloway from the LFG Podcast. Along with my co-host Jamie Kerstetter, we put out a couple shows each month showcasing the mid-stakes grinders who are working their butts off to climb the poker ladder towards fame and fortune. Give us a listen.
Hey guys, this is Sean Chafin, writer and host of the True Gambling Stories podcast. Each month we bring you a unique gambling or poker story that will keep you wondering what's next. Be sure to tune in.
And there you have it, an entire family of great poker podcasts for your listening pleasure, only on the Poker News Podcast Network. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode. Happy listening, and catch you later. #Brent, not Brett.